Welcome to Material Girls Long Arm Quilting. This is video 5 in our series on the value of a quilt. If you haven't watched the introduction or the other 4 videos in this series, I would invite you to check them out. Today's topic is legacy and heirloom quilts. This is a topic that's truly near and dear to my heart. Quilts can last for many years or even several generations, especially if they're well made with quality fabrics and they're cared for properly. It's amazing how long some quilts last in great condition. Even if they're not in perfect condition, there's still value in the history and stories behind them. Just look at some of the pieces in museums. It's just amazing to go in and watch and have a peek at what some of those amazing quilts are like. There are even people who collect vintage quilts at garage sales and auctions. If you look, you may even find some great pieces that aren't quilted and that you could add your own finishing touches to. The quilting can also contribute to the longevity of a quilt by making sure the layers are stable and that they don't shift and rub together to create problems. Quilts are a great way to bridge the generation gap, both by sharing the product and by giving a connection with former generations. Do you have any vintage quilts tops that need to be finished? Vintage quilt tops are something that I take great care in finishing, so my customers have something that will last a long time and preserve memories. Some of my favorite memories are of vintage quilts that customers have brought me. Just last year I had a gentleman bring me 4 baby quilts that his mother had made and he wanted finished for his kids so that they would have something to remember her by. And that was something that was really special to be able to work on. You can pass your quilts down to the next generation. I have quilts made by my grandmother nearly 100 years ago. For example, this one that you've seen behind me is one that I've been sharing in quite a few videos, and it is a double wedding ring that my grandmother made, and she completed all steps in it. So that one's pretty special to me because I have something that she started and finished, and it's all handmade, which is pretty special. I also have some that came to me unfinished, and then I'm working on finishing to remember her legacy. I've shared some of these with you in the past, and so that's something that I'll show you one right now. We'll just swing on over here. This quilt is really neat. That is an ocean wave that came to me with nothing in these block spaces. It had just holes there and the handwork of piecing all the spaces around it. And then she had these blocks that were just perfect size to put in there. So I bordered them and then inset them into those holes and made a finished top out of it. And you can see that these edges are a little bit different than the fabric over here. I did that on purpose so that you can tell what is my work and what is my great-grandmother's work. But yet they go together really nice. So that's something that I'm going to treasure for a very long time. And I had the privilege of finishing it and quilting it so that we can have her legacy. Coming back over this way. I also had some other quilts from her that were not finished. You may have seen this one on some of my previous videos as well. I also did some of the filming of the long arming of that one. That's one that she finished most of it, but there was some triangles and then the borders she didn't have finished, and we didn't have any fabric, so we found some fabric that was complementary and added that to the quilt, and then I did my magic on the long arm with it. So that's something that's special, and it's just waiting for a binding. And then I have one more. This is a really neat one. This is Bear Paws and Turkey Tracks are the types of blocks in it. And it was just the blocks that came to me in a stack. And I sashed them, made them all the right size, and then put borders on to make it a queen size quilt, because so many quilt beds nowadays are queen size. And if you don't have a queen size quilt, you can't use them very much. So that is something else that I have done to honor my great-grandmother, and she's I'm sure looking down and being very happy that her work was finished, and that one's just waiting for the long arming. How often do you see other things that can be a legacy in the same way that something handmade can be? There's not very often that you have that piece of everyday silverware that you buy in the store that has no special meaning that gets passed on, right? So there's always just that little extra bit that it makes it special because it either has family significance or somebody in your family made it, or it's always got that personal touch that makes it something that turns it into an heirloom and a legacy for your family. Let your quilts be your legacy and become heirlooms for those who come after. I really like to imagine what my great-grandmother, might have been like. I never met her, but I like to imagine from her choice of fabrics and patterns what she might have been like based on what I see of her work. When you're enjoying these vintage quilts, you can learn about the person who made it, what they liked to make, what the materials they used, what patterns they chose, and more. There are places to research what was common in certain times, such as the 1930s and 40s, where these fit in, and other time periods as well. Places such as the Quilt Index online, and there's also museums particularly in the US, but there's other places in the world that they exist also, where you can see vintage quilts and learn about them from the curators. The Royal Alberta Museum even has a curator that has researched stories of quilters in our province and produced a book that has some of those stories. It's a very interesting book and worth checking out if you have the chance. There's even a story about a quilt from one of our customers located right here. She had a quilt that she had made for her son, and it ended up traveling halfway across our continent before returning to her, which is quite an amazing story if you get a chance to read about the turbo quilt. We've also shared that on the Crafty Creations website under the stories, so if you get a chance to check that out, that would be a really cool story. Legacy quilts are quilts that bring memories forward in time. There are many types of legacy quilts. You can create something that remembers an ancestor, for example, remembering a gardening mom with a flower baguette quilt, or whatever her favorite type of activity would be. You could show off something important to you, a pet, people in your life, a cause, religion, ethnic identity, political statements, whatever it is that really pulls at your heartstrings, you can always show that off in a quilt. You can commemorate special events that have meaning to you, such as a family reunion. Last summer I had the privilege of quilting for a lady that was going down to the States for a family reunion, and she brought me pictures and sayings and things related to the people in her family for me to do a quilt with, and that was really special. Legacy quilts can be used to make a record of significant happenings, locally like a centennial celebration, or globally like the pandemic. There have been lots of people I've seen online sharing the quilts that they've made to honor the challenges we've all faced going through the pandemic, whether it's a particular fabric that's been used in the quilts, or applique, or even there's some longarm patterns that have been designed specifically for the pandemic and for nursing and for healthcare. So there's some really neat ways of being able to bring that legacy and those sentiments down to the past, or to our future, pardon me, not the past. Historically, quilts have even helped with causes, such as helping those on the Underground Railway find their way, or so the story goes. There's a little bit of controversy as to whether that's really true or just a story, but it's pretty cool. Raising money for local needs is another thing that quilts can be used for and can create a legacy for. In our local hospital, there's a foundation that does fundraisers for the extras that are needed in the hospital. And a few years ago, they had at their gala, they had a painting that was created by a young lady in a wheelchair, and they auctioned it off many times and put a plaque up near the painting, which hangs in the hospital to commemorate those who donated. So there's a legacy for those people. As well, of course, the lady that did the wheelchair painting. And of course, raising money for local needs, or even just making quilts to provide comfort for those who need it, whether they need it for emotional reasons or practical reasons. That's a really great way to contribute. Some professional quilters, like me, can even include writing on the quilt to honor or highlight whatever it is important to you. One quilt that I had quilted about 3 years ago had the name of a graduate, the faculty, and the university she graduated written on it with the long arm machine. It's a great memory and likely to become an heirloom down the road for that lady. One thing I hear too often is a quilter's concern that their work is not perfect enough, or precise enough, or just not as beautiful as they expect. Most of the quilts that I have come in to me to be quilted have some sort of imperfection in them, whether it's just off by a hair in the lining up of points, or off by quite a bit, or maybe they didn't press all the seams the right way, or they were sewing along and one of the seams flipped on them. There's almost always some sort of an imperfection in the quilt. But I am definitely not getting out a magnifying glass, and I'm really not looking to pick a quilt apart and tell you all the things that are wrong with them. But I believe that the imperfections add character to a quilt and actually add to the appeal. The Amish have a saying that goes something like this: only God is perfect, so they build a mistake into all their projects because they're not trying to be God. I love that sentiment, and I firmly believe that is the ideal attitude that we should be having for everything we create, whether it's quilts or meals or other crafts or furniture or whatever. Perfection is highly overrated in my opinion. I love the Amish attitude that we shouldn't be striving for perfection. We should be striving for very good. Quilts can be such a loving gesture, especially as a gift. It doesn't have to be square and technically perfect for it to be loved and cherished, and I want to help you get there. I really believe that my job is to add that professional touch to elevate every quilt. Whether you're just beginning in your quilting journey or have been doing it for years, this is a result I always strive for. Piecing is one thing, but quilting is a very different thing. And it would be my privilege to come alongside you and help you bring out that little extra something in your quilt. Check out my website and see how I might be able to help you finish your legacy projects. Join me next time as I talk about the value of the quilts in a money sense.